widowed mother with 2 daughters pulls over on a dark Alabama road to help an injured man. She doesn't know it yet, but this encounter will change her life forever. Blood ran down the stranger's forehead as Diane Williams slammed on the brakes of her old Honda Civic. It was almost midnight, and most people in her position, driving alone with 2 sleeping children in the back, would have kept going. But Diane was never the kind of person to look away from someone in need. The man lay beside a wrecked luxury car, his tailored clothes torn and covered in dirt. Even unconscious, his presence suggested he was someone used to being in control. His polished shoes stood in sharp contrast to Diane's worn work boots, the same ones she wore after endless shifts cleaning offices downtown. "Mom, why did we stop?" whispered Kesha, her 12-year-old, woken by the engine's rattle. "Someone's hurt, sweetheart," Diane replied, already stepping out into the night. At 35, she knew how quickly life could turn. 3 years earlier, her husband James had died in a construction accident, leaving her alone to raise 2 girls while buried in medical bills. The man stirred as she knelt beside him. His hair was streaked with gray, his gold watch catching the glow of her phone as she checked his pulse. "Sir, can you hear me?" Diane asked softly. His eyes flickered open, dazed, but within moments his expression sharpened, measuring her in the situation like someone who never stopped calculating. "You're on Route 17, outside Birmingham," Diane explained. "Your car rolled. You need a doctor." He looked at her, really looked, surprised that help had come from someone like her. "I'm Richard Davidson," he muttered, as though the name itself carried weight. "Diane Williams," she answered simply. "These are my daughters, Kesha and Amara. We're taking you to the hospital." Richard tried to insist he could manage, but when he attempted to stand, his strength failed him. Reluctantly, he allowed Diane to guide him into the back of her rattling Civic. During the silent drive, Diane glanced into the mirror. The man she would later learn was the CEO of a vast corporation sat slumped behind her, looking strangely lost. It wasn't just the injury. He seemed shaken by the fact that his survival now depended on the kindness of a woman he might never have noticed in his world of power and privilege. What Richard couldn't see was that Diane was no ordinary cleaning lady. She had once studied business, carried a mind sharpened by hardship, and bore a strength carved from struggle and loss. As the hospital lights came into view, Diane realized that fate had placed this powerful man in the most fragile position possible, forced to rely on her. If you're enjoying this story of 2 lives colliding in the most unexpected way, make sure to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. What happens next will prove that destiny often has its own ironic sense of humor. At the hospital, the difference was immediate. Nurses rushed, doctors appeared instantly, and even the director oversaw his care personally. Diane sat quietly in the corner with her daughters, just wanting to be sure the man she had helped was safe. "Only a concussion and a few stitches," the doctor announced. But Richard waved him off. "I don't have time for this. I've got a meeting tomorrow worth millions." It was then, for the first time, that Richard's eyes truly lingered on Diane and her girls, realizing they had stayed only to make sure he was okay. Something about the scene unsettled Richard. Maybe it was Diane's natural dignity, or the way her daughter sat quietly, well-mannered even in the chaos of a hospital at midnight. "Are you still here?" he asked, as though her presence were an inconvenience. "Thanks for the ride. My assistant is on his way." Diane nodded. "I'm glad you're all right, Mr. Davidson." But Richard wasn't finished. Something about her calm composure irritated him, the absence of deference he expected. Pulling out his wallet, he offered her a $20 bill as if tipping a valet. "Here, for the gas. Don't be proud. I know people like you need every penny." The silence that followed was heavy. Kesha frowned, sensing the insult, but Diane placed a steadying hand on her daughter's shoulder. "People like me," she repeated, her voice calm but firm. Richard shifted uneasily. "You know, hard-working, simple folks. There's no shame in that." Dr. Peterson cleared his throat, clearly wishing to step away from the awkwardness. Diane, however, didn't flinch. She studied Richard's face until he looked away. "I work 3 jobs to raise my daughters," she said at last, "and I've cleaned the offices at Davidson Industries every night for the past 2 years. The words hit Richard like a slap. He blinked, trying to connect this woman with the invisible night staff he had never once considered. People who moved quietly through his empire, unseen but essential. "Oh," was all he managed. "The 15th floor, southeast corner," Diane continued with a faint smile. "That's your office, isn't it? You work late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You always leave 3 half-finished cups of coffee on your desk, and you use a red pen to mark your contracts." Richard stiffened. She had memorized details of his routine, things he thought no one noticed. Suddenly, he felt exposed. "You're very observant," he muttered. "I have to be," Diane replied evenly. "My work depends on efficiency, on knowing every pattern so I stay invisible." Amara yawned on her mother's lap, reminding everyone of the late hour. Diane rose gracefully. "We should go. Tomorrow's a school day." "Wait," Richard said quickly, his tone different now. "You said you work 3 jobs?" "I do. Office cleaning at night, a grocery store on weekends, and house cleaning when I can," Diane explained, without a hint of self-pity. "My husband passed away. The bills didn't." For the first time, Richard saw past his own assumptions. He saw a woman who worked tirelessly, who carried her family forward alone, and who still stopped to help a stranger on the roadside. Her quiet strength stood in stark contrast to his own vulnerability. "Diane," he said, using her name for the first time, Can I do anything for you? You saved my life." She regarded him steadily, her eyes sharp, almost calculating. "Actually, there's something I've always wondered about your company." Richard leaned forward, curious. "I read in the paper about your acquisition of Hartwell Construction last month. $50 million. My husband worked there before he died." Her tone remained neutral. "I've always wondered how small, family-run companies are supposed to compete against corporations that can simply buy out any rival." The question caught him completely off guard. It wasn't the kind of inquiry he expected from a woman with a cleaning cart. The phrasing, the knowledge, it hinted at a mind far sharper than he had realized. "It's business," he replied, suddenly defensive. "That's how the market works. Competition." "Competition," Diane echoed softly, as though weighing the word. "Interesting concept." Just then, his assistant arrived, a nervous young man in an expensive suit who treated Diane and her girls as if they weren't even there. "Mr. Davidson, your car is waiting. Your wife is concerned." Richard stood, but hesitated. He glanced at Diane. "Listen, if you ever need anything—" "We're fine," Diane said simply, but her eyes lingered on him, holding a depth he couldn't quite decipher. There was a quiet determination in Diane's face that made Richard wonder what exactly was going through her mind. As Diane and her daughters left the hospital, Kesha finally asked, "Mommy, why did that man talk to you like that?" Diane paused in the parking lot, watching the sleek limousine carry Richard Davidson back into his world of privilege. "Because some people think money gives them the right to treat others as less, sweetheart." "But you're not less," Amara declared with the absolute certainty only children have. "No, I'm not," Diane agreed, a mysterious smile curving her lips. And maybe it's time some people learned that. What Richard Davidson didn't realize was that Diane Williams had spent the last 2 years noticing far more than spilled coffee cups and messy offices. Every overheard conversation, every document left on a desk, every corporate strategy discussed after hours, she had quietly absorbed it all. Her degree in management, once wasted, had finally found an outlet. 2 weeks after the hospital encounter, Diane returned to her night shift at Davidson Industries as though nothing had changed. But something had. She was no longer just another employee moving silently through the halls. She was a woman with purpose. Every room she cleaned now became a potential source of knowledge. On her first night back, Richard was working late, as she had predicted. He barely looked up when she entered his office, treating her like part of the background. "Diane, right?" he said distractedly. "I never thanked you properly for helping me that night." "There's no need, Mr. Davidson," she replied, emptying the bins with practiced efficiency. "Actually, there is." He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. $500. "For someone in your situation, this can make a difference." Diane froze, her eyes on the envelope. It was the second time he had tried to pay her for basic kindness, as though compassion were a service to be bought. "That's thoughtful of you," she said evenly, "but as I mentioned before, it isn't necessary." Richard frowned, clearly irritated by her refusal. "Look, Diane, don't be stubborn. Take it. It's a generous offer." "Generous," Diane repeated softly, as though testing the weight of the word. Richard glanced up, curious. "What do you mean?" "Only that generosity means very different things depending on where you're standing." Her tone unsettled him, though he couldn't say why. She finished her tasks in silence, but her eyes recorded everything: the folders spread across his desk, the half-written notes, the calls he made when he thought no one was listening. Over the next few days, Diane built a careful new routine. She arrived earlier, giving herself time to linger in hallways where executives spoke freely. She listened more closely during late-night meetings, always moving silently, always unseen. She began discreetly photographing documents carelessly left behind, records of mergers, layoffs, and backroom deals. It was during one of these nights that she crossed paths with Marcus Torres, a labor lawyer who kept a modest office on the ground floor. Unlike most professionals in the building, he always acknowledged her. "Another long night?" Marcus asked one Thursday evening, stepping into the elevator beside her. "They always are," Diane replied with a weary smile. "You know," Marcus said, adjusting the strap of his worn briefcase, "I've seen you around for months. Always professional, always quiet. I bet you come across some interesting things in this building." Diane studied him carefully. He was in his 40s, his suits clearly off the rack, his expression marked by years of battling real injustices. "Sometimes," she admitted cautiously. "I handle workplace discrimination cases," Marcus continued, "and I've learned that cleaning staff often witness more than anyone realizes. Executives rarely notice who's in the room after hours." His words planted a seed in Diane's mind. From then on, she paid even closer attention, especially to meetings about layoffs, acquisitions, and corporate strategies that devastated small communities. And then, one night, she struck gold. A series of printed emails left on Richard's desk, detailing discussions about the takeover of Hartwell Construction, the very company where her husband James had worked before his death. The documents told a story Richard Davidson never thought anyone would read. A deliberate strategy. First sabotage Hartwell's contracts, then scoop up the distressed company for pennies on the dollar. Ruthless, calculated, and perfectly legal-looking, until Diane found the proof that showed otherwise. But it wasn't Hartwell that lit the fire in Diane's chest. It was the night she overheard Richard speaking casually about human resource optimization. On a call with his CFO, he said, "They're easily replaceable, unskilled, no added value. We'll save $300,000 a year." He was talking about cleaning staff, many of them women who had worked in that building for decades. People like Diane, people like her friends, people he had reduced to numbers. The words echoed in her head as she silently wiped down the table, his chart still spread out before her, projecting higher profits built on other people's ruined livelihoods. That evening, Diane walked into Marcus Torres's small office on the ground floor and shut the door behind her. "I need to talk," she said, her voice steady but urgent. Marcus immediately noticed the change in her eyes. "I'm listening." If someone had evidence of discrimination, sabotage, maybe even fraud, what could they do? "That depends on the evidence," Marcus replied, leaning forward. "Are we talking hypotheticals, or—" Diane opened her purse and placed a thick envelope on his desk. Inside were photographs of emails, printouts of contracts, and pages of handwritten notes. "There's nothing hypothetical about this," she said. For 40 minutes, Marcus read in silence, his eyes widening with every page. At last, he set the papers down and exhaled. Diane, this is enough for at least 3 different federal cases. Discrimination, corporate fraud, market manipulation. This could bring down an entire empire. And revenge? Diane asked quietly. Marcus gave her a slow smile. I call it justice. But yes, it could change everything. That night, Diane sat at her kitchen table long after her daughters had gone to bed, carefully organizing every file in chronological order. Piece by piece, she was building something more powerful than any weapon, a complete dossier of corruption that Richard himself had left scattered around his office, assuming no one was watching. Every arrogant remark, every careless decision, every document he had signed, believing it would vanish into silence, all of it had been collected by the one person he thought invisible. Richard Davidson had laughed once about people who should know their place. He didn't realize that the woman cleaning his trash bin was already dismantling his world, quietly and methodically. Monday morning began as usual. Richard arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, coffee in hand, ready to finalize documents for the mass layoff. $300,000 in projected savings, everything perfectly planned. Diane was there too, finishing her morning shift. Good morning, Mr. Davidson, she said softly, emptying the bin beside his desk. He muttered, not even glancing at her. At 8:30, his assistant rushed in, pale. Sir, there are reporters in the lobby, and federal agents are on their way up. Richard frowned. Agents? What are you talking about? Before he could finish, 3 officials entered the room, followed by Marcus Torres and 2 other observers with clipboards. Richard Davidson, the lead agent announced, handing him official documents. You are hereby subpoenaed to appear before a federal grand jury. Preliminary charges include corporate fraud, market manipulation, systematic workplace discrimination, and money laundering. The room fell silent. Richard's assistant froze in the doorway. Diane, quietly folding her cleaning cloth, kept her gaze steady on the man who had once offered her $20 for her trouble. The empire that had taken years to build had started to collapse, brought down not by rival executives, but by the woman he had never truly seen. Richard's world stopped. This is ridiculous. I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus stepped forward, his tone sharp but professional. Mr. Davidson, I represent several victims of your company's practices. Perhaps this evidence will help refresh your memory. Only then did Richard notice Diane standing quietly in the corner, but she was no longer bent over a mop bucket. She stood tall, her eyes sharp with an intelligence he had never bothered to see. Diane? He muttered, genuinely confused. Actually, Marcus interrupted, allow me to properly introduce her. Diane Williams, bachelor's degree in business administration, University of Alabama. MBA program interrupted after the death of her husband. And now, our lead witness with direct access to your daily operations. He opened a thick folder on Richard's desk. Over the past 6 months, Ms. Williams has documented everything. Illegal practices, recorded conversations, photographs of confidential documents, emails, meeting notes, all of it. Richard stared at her in disbelief. You were spying on me? I was doing my job, Diane replied calmly. Yes, cleaning up, but it turns out I was also cleaning up the filth you left behind. Marcus continued, flipping pages. Here's proof of your deliberate sabotage of Hartwell Construction, where Ms. Williams's husband worked before he died. Contracts rigged to force bankruptcy, then acquisition for pennies. Richard felt his face drain of color. Those were legitimate business strategies. Marcus pressed play on a recording. Richard's own voice filled the office. They're easily replaceable, unskilled, no added value, will save $300,000 a year. The silence that followed was crushing. An interesting description, Marcus said coldly, for the woman who just gathered enough evidence to dismantle your empire. Richard's eyes darted around the room, realizing he was cornered. And here, Marcus added, we have records of bribes to city inspectors, conveniently left open on your desk during nightly cleanups, and the offshore accounts in the Caymans, clear evidence of tax evasion. Diane's voice, calm and steady, broke through the tension. For 2 years, I cleaned this office every night. I watched you celebrate layoffs, laugh at families losing everything, scheme ways to crush small businesses. I thought you were just cruel. Now I see. You're a criminal. Diane, wait, Richard pleaded. I can explain. I can make it up to you. Make it up to me? She repeated, her lips curling into a sad smile. Like the $20 you waved at me for saving your life? Or the $500 you tried to hand me for my silence? Marcus didn't let him respond. Mr. Davidson, your story is already public. The Atlanta Constitution and Channel 7 are both running it. Reporters are waiting downstairs. As if on cue, Richard's assistant stumbled in, pale. Sir, the board has called an emergency meeting, and your wife is on the phone. She says she's watching you live on TV. Richard rushed to the window. The parking lot below swarmed with reporters, cameras flashing, microphones raised. His empire was collapsing in real time for the whole city to see. How? He whispered hoarsely, turning back to Diane. How did a simple cleaning lady manage this? Diane's eyes flashed for the first time with quiet anger. A simple cleaning lady? She repeated. Mr. Davidson, invisible people see everything. Underestimated people notice everything. And the ones you call no value added apparently document everything. The lead federal agent stepped forward. Mr. Davidson, you'll need to come with us for questioning. Your lawyers can meet you at the federal building. As he was escorted out of his own office, Richard paused at the door, desperation etched across his face. Why? He asked. Why are you doing this to me? Diane looked him straight in the eye. Because James Williams wasn't just a name on one of your layoff forms. He was my husband, the father of my children, a good man who died working for a company you deliberately sabotaged. The words hit Richard like a blow he couldn't defend against. Suddenly, all the pieces connected. She hadn't just been watching, she had been waiting. What about the money? He whispered weakly. Diane's sad smile returned. You tried to buy my humanity for $20. And with that, she turned back to her cleaning cart, as though this too was just another night at work. You ended up losing $300 million. Seems like a bad deal, even for someone with your management experience. As the door closed behind Richard Davidson, Diane Williams calmly returned to her work. There was still plenty to clean, only now, for the first time in years, she was cleaning up the kind of dirt that truly mattered. 6 months later, Davidson Industries was no more. The company's doors shut permanently. Richard Davidson himself was serving a 16-year sentence for fraud, discrimination, and tax evasion. His mansion had been auctioned off, the proceeds used to compensate the people he had wronged. Meanwhile, Diane Williams sat in her new office on the 20th floor of the very building where she had once scrubbed bathrooms. Her corporate compliance consulting firm was thriving, helping companies avoid the same fatal mistakes that destroyed Davidson. Mom, you have 3 more interview requests, announced Kesha, now 13, efficiently sorting her mother's mail. Marcus Torres stepped in, carrying a stack of contracts. IBM wants to hire you. Your reputation for ethical practices is spreading nationwide. Diane smiled, gazing out the tall windows at the city below. Every passerby, every worker, every face had its own struggles, its own dignity, and all deserved respect. That morning, a letter had arrived from prison. Richard Davidson, stripped of everything, had finally written a genuine apology. Too late to salvage his empire, too late to reclaim his freedom, but perhaps not too late to recognize the humanity he had dismissed for so long. The best revenge, Diane realized, was never about destroying Richard Davidson. It was about building something greater than he could ever dream. Diane Williams had proven that underestimated people are not invisible. They are observant, and when they decide to act, they can rewrite the rules of the entire game. If this story of how intelligence and patience defeat arrogance and pride has inspired you, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes justice arrives quietly, yet powerfully, when we least expect it.